Welcome to the European Brain Council-sponsored symposium, Rethinking the Early Detection and Diagnosis of Alzheimer's Disease. My name is Lydia Landman, and I lead Roche's global policy efforts in Alzheimer's disease. It's my pleasure to be moderating today's session. I'm joined by an excellent group of speakers who will share their perspectives on the importance of early detection and a timely, accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. As a reminder, this symposium is being broadcast, so also a warm welcome to our online participants. We'll have time following our speakers' remarks to take questions from the audience, and if you're online, please pose any questions you may have in the virtual chat. As we all know, Alzheimer's disease is one of the most significant public health challenges of our time. AD presents approximately 60 to 70% of dementia cases, and despite advances in diagnostic tools, people are going undiagnosed, are having to wait years to receive a diagnosis, often only when symptoms become more evident as the disease progresses. Alzheimer's disease is a continuum consisting of various stages: asymptomatic or preclinical phase, which we heard about, I think, in the last session, so before symptoms appear, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, and dementia. Current research efforts have shifted really a focus to earlier stages of the disease, where therapeutic interventions, prevention, really aimed at slowing and preventing disease progression. Today's speakers will present these themes being tackled by a project called Rethinking AD, a project led by the European Brain Council, EBC, in collaboration with the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, EFPIA. The project aims to identify the roadblocks to early detection and diagnosis of AD within Europe and will propose new clinical pathways, building bridges between all stakeholders to improve the current situation and prepare for the future. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Kevin Quaid. Kevin is married to Helena, who is in our second row here. Give us a wave. He has 3 children, 3 stepchildren, and 5 grandchildren. He's an adventurer and loves to travel, and having spoken with Kevin, has an incredibly great sense of humor. Kevin was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia in 2017 at the age of 53. He is a member of the Irish Dementia Working Group, as well as vice chair of the European Working Group of People with Dementia and co-founder of Lewy Body Ireland. After his diagnosis, Kevin realized there was a lack of information about his particular form of dementia and wrote a book called Lewy Body Dementia: Survival in Me. He was one of the first people in the world to write a book about Lewy body dementia from both the patient's perspective as well as from his family's perspective. He has written a second book called I'm Kevin, Not Lewy. He is now an active advocate, and through his work with the Irish Dementia Group, supported by the Alzheimer Society of Ireland, raises awareness about the condition through speaking engagements and media appearances. And as of last week, he was a recipient of a presidential medal. I like to call it a gold medal, but he's far too humble and wants to just call it a presidential medal. So Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that fabulous introduction. You just gave away half my speech. It's a twist, isn't it? A person with Lewy body dementia standing up here talking about early diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Just proves how far we've come, doesn't it? The title is Early Diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and I just cannot begin to tell you the importance of that statement, an early diagnosis. You would imagine that it was common sense. But if life has taught me anything, common sense is not that common. If you attended a medical practitioner's office and you were given a diagnosis of cancer, you would be told what type, what stage, what medication, and there will be a plan put in place going forward for not just you but your family. Unfortunately, all too often, people who have dementia are not given that basic right. People are too often told that they have dementia or a touch of dementia, or that dementia is part of old age. For me, that is just so wrong. If you are not given a proper diagnosis, how can you get a proper treatment? It's actually not possible. Do you treat a person with front-temporal dementia the same as a person with vascular dementia? Do you treat a person with Lewy body dementia the same as a person with Alzheimer's? I don't think so. Alzheimer's is by far the most frequent diagnosed of all the approximate 400 types of dementia. I think Alzheimer's is up there 60 to 70%. Have you or your loved ones been given a proper diagnosis? Or have you, as a medical practitioner, given a proper diagnosis? If not, it's time to make it right, and the time is now. It's bad enough that we have no new medication for Alzheimer's in 20 years. Yet we were able to get a vaccine for COVID in less than 2. As I stand here today, as far as I'm concerned, someone is not doing their job. And people like me are being denied our basic human right of a proper and timely diagnosis. I was one of the lucky ones. I got a diagnosis of Parkinson's first. And then at the age of 53, I was given a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia as a result of having a DAT scan. And for those of you that don't know about a DAT scan, it's simply capital D, small a, capital T, that's it. It's actually 85 to 95% successful in giving a proper diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. And Lewy body dementia is a type of dementia that approximately 28% of people who have Alzheimer's go on to get. So that's something to keep in mind. As I said, I was one of the lucky ones, and I will explain why. My neurologist knew that there was more wrong with me than just Parkinson's. And she did every test imaginable. Blood tests, I had a lumbar puncture, PET scan, MRI scan, X-rays, and despite the fact that I have a lot of different medical conditions, like REM sleep behavior disorder, sleep apnea, high blood pressure, just to mention a few, because if I mentioned them all, the conference wouldn't end until next Sunday. She ruled nothing in or out until everything was ruled in or out. The very last scan she did on me was the DAT scan, because she did not think for a second that I had Lewy body dementia. But she didn't leave anything to chance. And she was amazed when the results came back. I was totally amazed when I was given the diagnosis, because I did not hear the word Lewy, I did not hear the word body, I only heard the word dementia. And I automatically assumed that dementia meant Alzheimer's. And I said, my memory is fine. What is she saying? I had never heard of young onset dementia or early onset dementia. And there's a difference between the two. Young onset dementia are people who are diagnosed when they're young. Early onset, the old people can get it. Very old people can get it. So there is a difference. But it was there that my journey for the last 6 years began. And it began with a proper diagnosis. Now we knew what we had. At least we knew what type of dementia I had and a proper way to treat it. I would later find out that Lewy body dementia accounts for between 10 to 15% of all types of dementia. and it proves that we have the scans and we have the technology to give a proper diagnosis. And the earlier in a person's life that they get the diagnosis, the better. The difference an early diagnosis can make in a person's life should never, ever be underestimated. A proper diagnosis at an early stage of disease can lead, like in my diagnosis of Lewy body dementia, to a slowing down or even an arresting of a disease that is both progressive and incurable. I could talk all day about the misuse and overprescribing of medication for people with dementia, but I won't. But I will tell you that a number of years ago, I was on 19 different medications. I am now on only 4 different types. 2 of them are for my dementia. The problem is, the more medication you or your loved one is on, you are just feeding the beast. And that beast is called dementia. Please don't think for 1 minute that you should stop taking medication. You don't ever start or stop medication without first speaking to your medical team. And always, always know why the person with dementia is taking the medication, the side effects, how it will react with other medication. Don't ever be afraid when you're sitting in front of a medical practitioner to ask the questions. Never be afraid to ask those questions. If it was any other disease, you'd ask, wouldn't you? Let's look at a person who, let's say, are in their late 80s or 90s, and they are unfortunate not to get a diagnosis until later in life. Let's just say it's Alzheimer's. Should they be told? Maybe, maybe not. Depending on their quality of life, if they are safe, happy and content in their daily lives, and telling them would greatly upset them, then maybe not. And I stress maybe. But their family and their loved ones need to know, because they can look out for them, knowing what type of dementia that they have. And the reason I am saying that is, a lawyer will tell you, you have to tell them. But it was a cousin of mine who came to me and asked me about an uncle of mine who was 89, that very exact question. And I said, what's his life like? He was happy, he was content. The kids were looking out for him, even though he didn't know it. They'd go over and play sport in his back garden. And he just loved looking out the window at them, so they knew he was safe. Why change that? But everyone's circumstance is different, and we've got to realise that. We've got to stop with this pigeonholing and putting, you have Alzheimer's, you've got to go into that box there. This has to stop. I will say it again, that I was one of the lucky ones, because I got an early diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. The day I got my diagnosis, my life didn't end. Quite the opposite, in fact, for me. A new life was born. I found the love of writing. For a guy that hated English going to school, for a guy that didn't like his English teacher, I found a love of writing. Something that I never knew I had. And like you said, when I published my first book called Lewy body dementia, Survival in Me, little did I know at the time that I was one of the first people in the world to write a book about Lewy body dementia from the patient's point of view. I just couldn't get over that. We're in the 21st century, whatever it is. I have since published a second book called I Am Kevin, Not Louis, and this is a book of hope. It's about some of the different types of dementia, not just Lewy body, and the things that a person can achieve after being given a diagnosis. I've actually begun writing my third. I don't know whether it's a sign of madness or not, but I have. I'm not saying this to impress you, but to impress upon you the importance of never, ever giving up. Alzheimer's, Lewy body, front temporal, vascular, or any type of dementia, please, please get a proper diagnosis. Then when you get it, you might not want to talk about it. You might not want people to know, and that's your right, and that's okay. But look for that passion in your life. Look for that inner strength that each and every one of us have. And never, ever let dementia define you. You are a person first, with all the goodness and beauty that you were born with. Do not let one diagnosis define you. I know several people who have Alzheimer's, as well as so many different types of dementia, and they will not let it define them. We who have been given a diagnosis of dementia have a voice. And until that voice is gone, please, never stop listening to us, because we are the experts in whatever type of dementia that we have. I will leave you with this. If you want to know what it's like to live with Lewy body dementia, ask my wife. If you want to know what it's like to have it, then you ask me. I'm not an expert in many things, or never was, but I am an expert in having Lewy body dementia. Thank you.
I can barely keep it together after hearing that. But thank you, Kevin. I mean, ever inspiring, but also I think the story of hope, of advocating for yourself, and also now advocating for many others around the world. So on behalf, thank you. Our next speaker, get it together, Landman. Our next speaker is Veja van der Vleer, Scientific Director of the Alzheimer Center Amsterdam at Amsterdam UMC in the Netherlands. Veja is a full professor. She's studied neuropsychology at the University of Utrecht. In addition, she is a clinical epidemiologist. She leads the Amsterdam Dementia Cohort, an ongoing memory clinic-based cohort including over 6,000 patients with deep phenotyping, so that's MRI, EEG, CSF, biomarkers, and PET, and a linked biobank in blood, DNA, and CSF. Veja, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think I can reflect on what Kevin has been saying. So yeah, that was very impressive. Is this better? Oh yeah, I had to do it myself. Oh, okay. There was already a light on, but it was not the right color. Thank you. So Kevin, that was very impressive, and I've been thinking of what I heard, and I heard that there's hope, and that patients want hope, but that hope is not the same as ignoring the disease, and that actually acknowledging the disease and acknowledging that Alzheimer's, dementia with Lewy bodies are diseases, brain diseases that you can have, is helping the hope that you can actually, with the disease, shape your life. Because that, yeah, am I okay? I have an echo. I'm quite far, yeah. I have to be closer. Oh, is it this better? Ah, okay, thank you. So let me. So what you sometimes hear is that a diagnosis or an early diagnosis might not be useful because there's no actionability. And then people say there's no actionability because there is no treatment that cures the disease. But I think that what you actually discussed very eloquently, made very clear, is that there's a lot of actionability because you had the diagnosis, you were able to say, I want to stand up for this disease, I want to do this, I want to write a book. So it actually gave you the tools to become actionable. And this is something that I just learned from you and that I found very valuable. And when we talk about early diagnosis, it's always a question, so what are we talking about? And I think what's very relevant is when you think about dementia, there's like 55 million individuals with dementia worldwide estimated. And now that we have biomarkers, we can also say more precise what type of dementia do they have. So at the best estimate, there's like 32 million with Alzheimer's disease dementia patients. But when you think about this, that actually the disease starts a long time before the dementia stage, then it's logical that the numbers of pre-dementia patients are even larger. And actually recent estimates of this prevalence are that there's almost 70 million individuals with MCI, mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease worldwide. And preclinical Alzheimer's disease, that would be Alzheimer's brain pathology, but no signs or symptoms yet. That might be over 300 million individuals. And there's a huge scope of opportunity there for intervention, future intervention. We're not there yet, but we do need individuals like Kevin to stand up and say, I want that something is to be done about these diseases, that we can in the future actually stop these diseases before they become full-blown dementia. And that means there's a huge opportunity there. So I think that what we learned is diagnosis is important. There was also something that I thought I might actually think a little bit different about, because you shared very kindly how your neurologist was willing to do every test there was. But I don't think that that's what we should be heading for, because imagine that all these millions of people with pre-dementia stages would want to have every test there is. I don't think it's feasible. I mean, perhaps it's also not necessary. So the real challenge that we have as a research field and as a healthcare field is determining what's the best way to make sure that everybody gets the tests they need. That we do tests only when needed and not when not necessary. And I think that in the future we may be heading towards some kind of a funneled diagnosis. That in many countries it starts with the general practitioner, that the general practitioner already does some tests and then refers to a memory clinic, yes or no. And then from there we move on, so which tests should be done, which tests should not be done. And actually we also do research to see if we can use all these data that we have to come in a data-driven way to determine when does a diagnostic have added value and when does it not have so much added value, so that in the future we can make more evidence-based choices as to which diagnostic test might help which patient. I think that's an important direction to go as well. And there, of course, we can also think about the blood-based biomarker. Because at this stage, it's rather a problem sometimes, at least in the Netherlands, this is a problem, and I guess perhaps in many other countries as well, that when patients come to the general practitioners being very worried about their memory, they're sometimes, or more often than not, sent home, well, you're doing okay on the cognitive screening test, don't worry, we can't do anything anyway, so why bother with the diagnosis, and just go home and be reassured. In some cases that might be okay, in other cases it's not okay. And when we get people in the Alzheimer Center Amsterdam, often they have been going from door to door for years and are so relieved to finally get an answer as to what is actually being wrong with them. So I think that in the future, for example, a blood-based biomarker and perhaps also digital cognitive tests that might be more sensitive than the tests we have now and more easy to deploy, might help to actually have more evidence-based reassurance. Go home, you do not have a neurodegenerative disease, so no need for additional testing, or referral to a memory clinic to do proper diagnostic testing. Because I think in the next years to come, the blood-based biomarker will never be enough, but it might be a pre-screener, a first diagnostic test. So those were some of the initial thoughts I had. Lydia, would you have some additional questions? Or
Is on? Perfect. No, and I think I really want to kind of go back to some of your initial comments around we've seen some recent studies showing where we're seeing the largest prevalence of the disease. There's a couple new EPI studies that have been released, and really in this kind of preclinical, pre-symptomatic, at-risk potentially phase. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in terms of prevention, risk reduction, and early detection and potential interventions?
yeah, so that's a nice question, and I briefly touched upon it. That of course the huge numbers of individuals with a preclinical disease, they provide a huge window of opportunity. But I think it's very important to discuss what we're talking about. And when we talk about the hope that there will be disease-modifying treatment at the horizon, then really, when it comes to the market, that will be first for patients with mild dementia and mild cognitive impairment. So it would be for that group, the group with mild cognitive impairments particularly, that I think that accurate diagnosis, molecular diagnosis, will be very relevant in the relatively short term. That's the group. And I think that's the group that now often does not get the help, the diagnostic help that they want. Then there is this huge group of individuals at risk, of individuals with preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And of course, when we think in the plenary just now, we heard a lot about the potential of lifestyle interventions and very early prevention. And of course, there's a huge opportunity for intervention there as well. I think, for example, with lifestyle interventions, it might be very interesting. We do not know yet, so we now heard very well, we do not know yet how well lifestyle improvement works to delay dementia. We don't know that yet at all. But particularly, we don't know yet that when the Alzheimer's disease pathology has started, can you still bend the curve, delay the progression by improving your lifestyle, for example. So there's huge opportunities there as well. And of course, when you think about the disease-modifying treatments, when they would come to the market, and they would initially only be relevant for the mild cognitive impairment population, I'm sure that we will then see studies moving even more forward. And I would be very interested and very closely following these studies.
Yeah,
but that's longer term.
Yeah, and I think there's already some studies that have, I think, started recruiting that are looking at this preclinical phase focused on prevention.
Of course.
So when you look at the prevalence numbers alone, this is a really compelling, kind of very interesting area. You touched on this about primary care and delays and people having to, you said, kind of shop around for sometimes years. And really, I think we're seeing kind of maybe a lack of discussion around brain health or cognitive health, very different than we're seeing kind of discussions of other heart health, vascular health, et cetera. What do you think could be done to kind of improve this? Is it more education? Is it better tools? Is it just more awareness?
Yeah, probably all of those, but I think it all starts with awareness. And awareness that these dementias, these different types of dementias are brain diseases, awareness that there are factors influencing your brain health, and that these factors may also entail lifestyle, that you can actually do something about it, and also tools probably to more closely monitor how your brain functions are, so the cognitive tooling. But I think it all starts with awareness, and that you actually, that's the factors that influence your brain health. That would be my number one.
I think we call it, there's a phrase that's been used, I think, largely in the US, but it's check up from the neck up, right? So similar to your annual wellness check. But I think before we give the floor to Lenka, I think Kevin had a couple comments.
Yes, thanks, and thanks a million for your comments. It's just something you had said about maybe not doing every test. If you know what type of dementia it is, then obviously you don't need to do every test. But if my neurologist hadn't persisted, I would not be here today. Because the day I was hanging from the rafter, that the belt broke. It's only the belt breaking that saved my life. Think about Robin Williams. Think about how he died. He asked, did he have dementia? I'm the lucky one. My neurologist didn't give up. So I don't care. I don't care if it's feasible or not. You will be told the type of cancer you have. We have to be told the type of dementia we have. I had to be told that I had Lewy body dementia because I have a wife, I have kids, and I have grandkids who I love dearly. And the day that I tried to commit suicide, it was just sheer luck. But the day after, the 3 days after, would have been my funeral. And when I looked at my wife's eyes, she was thinking what I was thinking. We deserve to know. And I don't care how many tests it takes. And I don't care how long it takes. We deserve to know, and we have a right to know. And we should keep going until it's a definite. Not a maybe. I shouldn't be able to just have to identify an elephant, a giraffe, and a rhinoceros on a piece of paper. I need a definite. And I will never, ever give up on that one. Thanks.
Kevin, I couldn't agree more. Oh, very important. And we are talking about Alzheimer's disease today, and you have another type of dementia. And only too often do we see that those other types of dementia are not being recognized. And in those cases, it's very important that you're being referred to an expert memory clinic. Not your GP, not your memory clinic next door, but an expert memory clinic who do have the clinical expertise to recognize and to do the tests necessary for these types of dementia.
So our next speaker is Lenka Kravjukova, who's assistant professor at Masaryk University in Czech Republic. Lenka has a PhD in neurology. Her scientific topics include neurodegenerative disorders, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's disease in particular, movement disorders, cognitive disorders. She's been involved in numerous research projects such as the microbiome in neurodegenerative diseases with cognitive impairment through the Czech National Recovery Program, diagnostics of Lewy body diseases, and the prodromal stage based in the multimodal data analysis supported by the Ministry of Health in the Czech Republic. Lenka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this symposium for inviting me. It's my great honor and pleasure to be here. And I'm afraid that I will give only small contribution to those previous talks. And I just say one small comment that DLB, or dementia with Lewy bodies, is or may be often misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's disease. So it's very important to go to, as a neurologist, I can say that we have a lot of patients like you. So it's important to go to specialists and do all the possible tests and do all the effort to get to the proper diagnosis.
So Lenka, in kind of your practice as a specialist, we currently see a lot of referrals. So there's not kind of ability to maybe pinpoint or provide this accurate, definitive diagnosis in primary care. So you're seeing a lot of cases referred from primary care, often late to specialists like yourself. To be able to diagnose Alzheimer's disease, in your view, would kind of the introduction, I think Vijay touched on it in terms of blood-based biomarkers. Would this help improve early detection and diagnosis? Would this help you in terms of managing all of those patients that are getting referred to you? Would this allow you to focus on those ones that perhaps have shown to have, the pathophysiology, and then allow you to do the further cognitive tests?
Yeah, I think that it would help greatly because, as you may know, there are several types of biomarkers. Not all of them are usable or are appropriate for clinical practice. speaking about the biological background or neuropathology of Alzheimer's disease, we have two biomarkers or two examination that we can use. It's PET imaging or CSF sampling. And problems with this examination is that both are more or less invasive. A lot of people is let's say, afraid or not willing to undergo lumbar puncture because of they are afraid of pain. For example, in our population, they are also afraid that they get paralyzed or something. So, for example, in our country, we have a really small percentage of patients that are really willing to undergo lumbar puncture unless it's absolutely absolutely needed. So this is the problem with CSF sampling and lumbar puncture. And the problem with PET imaging is that it's quite expensive and it's not available in all the regions. So imagine that we have a very simple, cheap biomarker from blood that we can take from a patient in the general practice in GP. In GPs, for example, like testing for PSA level as a screening test for prostate cancer, that would be ideal. So that's why it could help really to improve the early diagnosis in these patients, and the doctor can take blood and do the simple test and then refer the patient with high risk of neurodegeneration or Alzheimer's disease to the specialist. That would be ideal situation, but unfortunately we are not so far yet, but hopefully.
Kind of to help triage those patients who then would go on for more testing through CSF or PET. No, you touched on, some of these are challenges. I think there's, these perceptions, either real or not, of, invasiveness of lumbar punctures. There's issues related to healthcare capacity and access to kind of PET, right, particularly in clinical practice. How do you, assuming that we could address all of that, how do you think, what are things that are needed to integrate kind of a biomarker confirmed diagnosis, so this kind of really accurate diagnosis into clinical practice? Because I think right now it's sometimes very much limited to research settings or, for entry into clinical trials, etc.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So first and very important step, I think, is the identification of those patients that should undergo this special examinations. So, of course, we can do this in a special center. Yeah, every doctor or every specialist in memory center, memory clinic can do this, but they can't do this alone. So we need the contribution from all other doctors, for all the primary care doctors, GPs, and ideally every doctor that patients visit. These doctors, general practitioners mainly, should be active in this field. They should actively seek for those at risk for Alzheimer's disease. They should test them. They should ask for the memory problems. We all know that there are a lot of risk factors. And the main one is age, so they have a lot of older patients, so they should ask them and their families about their brains, the functions of the brains, and also they can identify a lot of other risk factors. They can also identify they can do the simple screening test. I know they are not very sensitive, but at least they can have some information about the cognitive functions. So there are a lot of things that general practitioners and other doctors can do, And then when we have such patient, they can refer to a specialist to make the diagnosis, to make the special examinations.
Increased use of multidisciplinary teams, some kind of established referral pathways, sounds like these things. So there's quite a few questions and comments on the online chat. So are you guys ready? Good.
No bad ones, please.
No, only good ones. This is the rule. The first one for Kevin, and I think this is a really interesting one, particularly given we're surrounded by advocates in this conference. Do you think your activism has helped to slow down the progression of your Lewy body dementia?
That is a question I absolutely love to answer, because about 12 weeks ago now, I had my first face-to-face meeting with my neurologist since COVID. We had phone calls every couple of months, and she sat in front of me and she started smiling. And I said, before you say anything, if you told me I'd have been this good 2 years ago, I'd have taken your hand off. And she said, I couldn't have. Because she said, when I look back on your scan, I have seen people come in here younger than you, older than you, the same age as you. And their disease has progressed at an enormous rate. She actually frightened me when she said, the progression is so rapid. She said, what are you doing? So I started calling out all the things I was doing, and she started writing, and she said, you know, there's only so much ink in this pen. But she said to me, she said, it's not what I'm doing, she said, it's what you're doing. And what I do every day, Monday to Friday, is I treat my advocacy work as my job. I put on my shirt, I put on my tie. I made a little office, well I didn't, my kids and stepkids did, outside in where my shed was, and I go to work. And I do my advocacy work, my writing, or whatever it was. And that's what keeps me going. And my neurologist said, you keep doing what you're doing, and you'll keep getting what you're getting. But I just want to go back a small bit. When we lived in Australia, within a year and a half, I was taken to hospital with Boerhoove's disease. The nickname for that is the devil's grip. It mimics a heart attack. You've every single, they were slapping me across the face saying, stay with me, Kevin. I was thinking, don't hit me. And I was taken off by ambulance. Then I got viral meningitis. Then I got the bird flu, or H1N1 I think it's called. I was diagnosed with Paget's disease. And there was a doctor there. He didn't look at why I was in hospital. He wanted to know why I was in hospital so often. And I had told him that we were going back to Ireland. And he said, just for my sake, as in the doctor's sake, will you have a look and get checked out for early onset Alzheimer's or Parkinson's? Now, I would have thought he was mad, but for the fact that an uncle on my father's side had died from Alzheimer's. But when I think back on it, and when I speak to my neurologist about it, there was red flags very early in the time in my 40s. I was in hospital for 3 weeks with blood pressure that could not be controlled. I was attending the doctors for constipation, and nothing was working. So even chemists can play a massive role. If you're going into a chemist and the Movacol is not working, or the Fibrogel is not working, or everything that you're taking for the constipation is not working, I'm not saying you've dementia, but it's a flag. It's a red flag. Sometimes you need to go below the system, or the symptom. You need to see what's underneath the symptom. What is causing the problem? What is the root cause? And I think if we can go there early enough on the time, maybe I'm living in cuckoo land, I don't know, but it just might help. You know, that doctor had an open mind. He identified Parkinson's and he identified Alzheimer's. And when I came back home and I went to my GP, it was the first thing I said to him. I said, I don't mind, but he said she's the best. How right was that doctor a year and a half before that? Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. The next question we have, Vij, is for you, is what is your view on involving families in helping with diagnosis who often notice the small changes before the person does themselves? These may be some red flags.
Yes, I think that's actually self-evident, and the basis of every diagnosis of dementia is that what we call the history, anamnesis, and the history taken by the patient and their family is very important. And all other diagnostic tests should really be weighed into that information. And there was another thing that is not a question right now, but what struck me with what Kevin was saying and what reminded me, if I may give an answer to a question that was not being asked. Now that we're here together anyway. No, I was asked earlier today, so do people want a prognosis? Because we often have the experience that it gives a lot of anxiety and depression later on. And whilst of course that can be true, I found it so telling, Kevin, that you said the depression was there before I had the diagnosis. The depression was there with the frustration and the not knowing, and actually somebody acknowledging what was wrong with me, explaining what's going on in my brain, that I have a disease, that it's not me that's being mad, it's the disease, that I have this, actually helped you overcome those bad emotions. And that's something that I wanted to, say that I heard you say that, and that was actually an answer to a question that was earlier asked to me before today.
Great, thanks a lot. Are there any questions from the floor here for Kevin, Link, or Vij? I'll just go into the audience. This is like Oprah Winfrey, circa 95.
My name is Jane. I'm the wife of Chris Roberts, so you might all know me as a carer of somebody living with vascular and Alzheimer's disease. My question is about the potential blood tests that are coming through at the GPs, and I think Kevin being here with Lewy bodies will highlight this. Is there a risk that if we do get that very simple blood test and there are no biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, the patient may be sent away to do the watch and wait, whereas it could be something more, a different type of dementia that wouldn't show up in the blood test? Is there a risk that Kevin's type of dementia might be missed because we're reliant on those biomarkers?
Okay, maybe I can answer that. Surely no, watch and wait. This test should be done just to see if there's something happening in the brain. Of course, the blood test itself will not set the diagnosis, of course, but the patient should be referred, should go to the specialist, and other investigation, other examination should be done, MRI or brain imaging, and of course cognitive testing, and if needed also PET or CSF, we'll see. So of course it's about the further management of such patient who is at risk of some neurodegenerative disease. I can say that there is one potential biomarker like this in Alzheimer's disease or other neurodegeneration. It's called neurofilament light chains. It's nowadays it's used, for example, for screening the patient with sclerosis multiplex to its prognostic marker for disease progression. So it's used in another disease, but it gives information about the neurodegeneration, about the neuronal death, to be more specific. And this neuronal death can be from various because of various causes, but one of them is also Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. So if we can put this biomarker to routine clinical practice, we can see that there is a patient with some kind of neurodegeneration. We can send him to specialists, for example, to neurologist that can do the MRI and other assessments, other examinations, and then we will see. So I would say that this is the idea.
Thank you. Vijay, any other comments on that?
I think I would rather say the same. Your point is very well taken. The blood-based biomarker, which is now mostly for Alzheimer's disease, but like Lenka said, there's also a marker which is more general neurodegeneration, should never be used in isolation, and we need these educational programs, and we need these actually attention for these red flags that are being mentioned also by Kevin. So that would be more the clinical signs and symptoms that are also not always known well enough with general practitioners. So there's a large educational need, particularly also for the non-AD dementias. And then, as a researcher, there's a large task for us as researchers as well, because particularly for the protein, which is doing the wrong in Parkinson's and dementia with Lewy body, this protein is called alpha-synuclein. We do not yet have a biomarker for that. Well, actually, we're starting to have one that can be done in CSF. We hope that this works. And when it works, we hope we can then develop it further to blood. So there's still work to be done for the research front as well.
Good to hear. Any other questions from the room here? No? I have kind of maybe a final question. So I think, you know, a lot of times at these conferences, we talk about the challenges, we talk about the problems. I wanted us to kind of end on a high note, kind of a note of hope. And so I'd ask each one of you, what is the one thing that you'd like all of us to leave today thinking about? What's one thing that we can kind of do, whether it's advocate more, whether it's, you know, talk about cognitive health, that we can each kind of take and think for ourselves, how can we really kind of improve detection and diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease? How about, I'm going to leave you last. I want to keep you last, okay? So, Vijay or Lenka.
Shall I start? So my plea would be involved in research. Actually, what I was just saying, we're not there yet. We do not know yet enough. We need to know more. And the way to end up with solutions for Alzheimer's disease is doing research. So whether you are a clinician or whether you are a patient or a caregiver, be involved. Participate.
Great. Lenka.
Okay, so I would appeal to all my colleagues and GPs and other doctors to be active. So this is what I would like to see from all of my colleagues, and also all the patients' activities welcome, so we can build those bridges between us, the specialists, and the GPs and the patients who are still waiting for the diagnosis.
Thanks, Lenka. And to you, Kevin.
Nothing to say. No, the one thing I would like to end on is clinicians and medical experts are wonderful. But don't ever, ever, ever take for granted the wonderful work that researchers do. Because without researchers, we'd have nothing. And I learned a very valuable lesson this year. I was working with a college in Limerick. Researchers are not robots. Most of the researchers, whatever field of research they go into, they have a vested interest in that if someone is researching, say, Alzheimer's disease, more than likely someone in their family has had it. So if a researcher comes to me today and discusses Lewy body dementia, and they go home and they're in bits because Kevin reminded them of their dad or their grandfather, or their brother who had it. Researchers need peer support. And researchers need to be able to go upline, for want of a better word, and say, I was with Kevin today. He reminded me so much of my dad. I'm so upset. They need to be able to download on someone. And that will make room for better research. Only for researchers and only for the incredible work they're doing, we owe them such a debt of gratitude. I will never be thankful enough for everything that you do. You're probably, I'm not cutting down GPs or neurologists or anything, but you're probably one of the finest group of people on the planet. Thanks for everything you do.
I think we now all see why I left you last, right? So we've kind of reached the end of this session. So thank you, all of the speakers here, for inspiring us, for leaving us with some things to think about, some things to do, some things to start and continue. And look forward and kind of keep your eyes peeled. The Rethinking AD project from the European Brain Council the results will be released in January. They'll provide, I think, some good suggestions and recommendations from clinical experts as well as others around new pathways, what can be done to improve early detection and diagnosis. Goodbye to our friends online, and a last thank you to the Alzheimer's Europe organizers for a wonderful Congress and for giving us an opportunity to all be here today. So have a good evening.